All right, for this video, I thought we would visit the bread research lab here at Two Hammers Farm and check in on a project I started about 40 years ago when I started baking bread occasionally. And my goal was to come up with a bread that's perfect for a toasted cheese sandwich. And over the last few years, I've gotten more serious with my bread baking. And part of the reason is that, and I'll talk about this more later, is I discovered Weisenberger Mill Flour. And they make a whole line of great products. And there's three that I use primarily, different flours they make. I'm going to talk first about the whole wheat blend, which according to the label is soft whole wheat flour and hard unbleached flour. I also use their unbleached high gluten bread flour. I also use that for pizza doughs. And there's a third one that I'm out of, which is their unbleached white bread flour, which is a real nice flour. And I thought I'd show you this loaf I baked yesterday. And it was kind of an experiment. I normally do all kind of blends. And this time I just used all of the whole wheat blend to see what a loaf like that looks like. And again, it's my standard 500 grain loaf when I'm experimenting. And had a nice shape, had a pretty good rise, but I don't know how much you can see that. The interior structure is a little bit denser than I like. Some people like a real dense bread. I tend to be the only one in the family. So I look for a little bit more open texture. So on the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about a different blend, but I thought I'd show you what this looks like with just the whole wheat blend. And in the end of the video, I got some shots of the loaf I bake, and it'll show you the difference. All right, time to bake. One of the things I did a few years ago was I switched from using measuring cups on all my ingredients to weighing everything, and I got a lot more consistent results. So if you're going to do this method, you need some kind of a digital scale. They're real handy to have anyways. And the other thing, if you're lucky enough to live in central Kentucky, I use Weisenberger flour for all my bread baking. It's a real neat mill. Look it up on the web. It's been family run since the Civil War, same site, stone ground. They got excellent grits and stuff. If you don't have access to Weisenberger, I would recommend getting whatever your local equivalent of a bread flour, something that's specifically made for bread flour. I've used all-purpose before. I think the results I get with specific bread flour, I think tastes a lot better. And this outfit, they make a variety of different kind of bread flours. I'm running a little low on my mainstay, which is their unbleached white bread flour. So this winter I've been playing around with different mixes. I tend to come up with my own blends. And for what we're going to do today, I'm going to be using these two, the whole wheat blend and the unbleached high gluten bread flour, which I started using for my pizza doughs. And I mix it half and half with the unbleached white bread flour. It makes a very nice pizza dough. Let's see. And the other thing I started doing, rather than following specific bread recipes, I started following what they call the baker's ratio. And you can look that up at about anywhere. And it's a kind of an industry standard. And you start with however much flour you're going to use, and all your other ingredients are a percentage of that. And all these loaves I've been doing when I've been in research phase is based on 500 grams of flour. And I'm going to tweak a blend I've been working on a little bit today. And I'm going to be going with 60% blend of the whole wheat and then the balance, the high gluten bread flour. So I turn on my little digital scale there, and I'm going to start with 300 grams of the whole wheat blend. And I tend to be pretty precise just because that's my nature. I don't think you have to be. I think your results will be fine if you don't fuss around like you'll see me doing, just because trying to be a little bit scientific, a little bit OCD. There's my 300 grams of that. I top it off, going for my goal of 500 grams. And I'm probably gonna have to open that other bag. Oh, no. And there's my 500 grams of flour. Another thing I've done over the years is I changed the way I handle the yeast. I used to always dissolve the yeast in the water and wait till it got activated. And reading up on some other methodologies, I mix all my dry ingredients together now. And I'm using 15 grams of yeast, which again is the baker's ratio. And I moved indoors. I built an outdoor pizza oven kind of a thing that I've been baking bread in, but that's its own art, getting the fire and the heat ready. And I wasn't really happy with my results, so I thought over the winter I'll fine-tune some of my dough methodology, going with 10 grams of salt. One a little high there. There we go, 10 grams of salt. So I'll throw that in the dry mix. And then I use a mixer because I have one, it's easier. You don't have to have one. You get real good results without one. I'm gonna mix these dry ingredients together for a second. This long enough to mix them up good. I'm gonna take that off, put my dough hook on. Now I'm going to weigh out my water. And this is where I found you have to kind of do your own research and learn a few things. Always reset your tare weight there. I'm going with 325 grams of liquid, and that's going to include a little dab of honey that I just use as a sweetener. And I don't measure it out. It's probably about a tablespoon, but just a dab. If I'm doing a rye bread, I'll use some molasses, something like that. So I'm going to go with 325 grams of water, which is 65% ratio of water to your total flour. And when you do your ratios, everything's based on your total amount of flour. Because like I've obviously got more than 500 grams in there because I mixed the other dry ingredients. But that's not the way I calculate it anyways. So I went a little bit over. Get back to my 325. Right there. And I settled on 65% liquid because I've been reading a little bit and finding out that how much whole wheat flour you use in your dough really affects the performance. Whole wheat flour tends to be a little bit thirstier than just doing a straight white flour mix. And the whole wheat flour wants you to handle it a little bit differently. I found out I was tending to over knead my doughs, and that was affecting the rise. So I'm gonna first take a little whisk here and incorporate that honey in the water. And I use cool water. That's another change. For years when I did bread, I would use like tepid or lukewarm water, throw the yeast in here, it'd be all foamy, mix it in. And I've since come around to the idea of the slower rise on the bread. I think a slower rise, you get a better flavor, you get a little bit better texture. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna dump all this water in. And I'm gonna kind of mix it together with the spatula to help minimize the amount of time I have it under the bread hook. And again, with the eye of not over kneading it. Because I'm gonna run it with the bread hook until basically it forms a nice dough ball and it picks up all the flour off of the sides. And final product, I'll edit this down. So this will take longer than what you will see on the video, because no sense sitting there watching the mixer go around. All right, not sure how much of that y'all can see, but I've run it till it's formed a nice dough ball. It's picked up all the stray flour off of the sides of the bowl. And now I'll put it out here on the counter, finish it up. And I've got some olive oil here that I'm going to use to coat the bowl for the rise. And I'll be using that later for my final proofing. I always oil up my hands a little bit. I think it keeps the flour from sticking a little bit. And I'm going to take a little bit of my bread flour, the white one, just lightly dust it here a little bit. Usually doesn't take much. And I'm going to knead this. I can't really give you a time frame because starting out is kind of sticky, and you see doesn't really have a together structure. And I'm just going to knead it till it feels right to me. And that generally takes at least 3 minutes, usually not more than 7 or 8. And another thing I found, if you get your ratios of ingredients right, especially with the whole wheat loaf, it's not as sticky of a loaf. You see, it doesn't really want to stick to the counter that much. And I'm not using a lot of flour on the counter, kind of just enough to keep it from sticking. And occasionally, I might add a little dusting to the loaf if I think it still feels too sticky. I did learn a trick you might have seen elsewhere if you've watched other bread making videos in terms of the kneading, and that you want to kind of rock your whole body, not just use your arm, because unless you're used to doing this or some other activity, man, your arm can get really tired after a minute or two of this. And I can already feel the texture starting to change. And you can see it too. It's starting to push back a little bit. And like I say, I've done this enough. I don't have set times for everything. I've kind of figured out how to listen to the dough a little bit, just in terms of how it's acting. And I'm kind of single-minded. I don't bake a lot of different things. I've got a rye bread that I've been playing around with, and white bread, because that's so easy. You're just using all white flour. And I use a little bit less water, because otherwise it's too sticky and you don't get a good rise. And then this winter, I just started trying to make korvapuusti, which is a Finnish cinnamon roll that uses cardamom, and it's just amazing. We were lucky enough to travel there and got to taste the real ones a few years back. So I decided I'd see if I could learn how to make those. And again, there's lots of recipes on the web for korvapuusti, K-O-R-V something something. And they're nice because even if they don't turn out looking very good, they still taste wonderful. All right, so this loaf is starting to feel about right. It's stiffening up a little bit. It's, like I say, it's resisting a little bit more. And like I say, with the whole wheat, one of the things I read was that the whole wheat grains have a sharper edge to them. And if you over knead it, they'll tend to cut the gluten fibers, and that'll keep you from having a good rise. And that's about where I like it. And I won't edit the time down on this, so this, however long this takes in the video, is how long I spent. And that's starting to feel kind of right. And I'll form this up, a little trick. Again, depending on who's watching this, either you've made a lot of bread or you're thinking about trying it for the first time. This little trick right here is a nice way to form up your dough ball to start with. And you see, I've got a couple little seam pockets there, but I'm not worried about that at this point. So I'm going to put my leftover flour back in the bag. I'm going to get my bowl ready. Put a little dab of olive oil in the bottom of that. And another thing I've come around to doing, for years, when I would let my bread rise, and I've tried different things. I've got a proofing feature on the oven. I've tried proofing it in the oven. I've tried covering it with a towel. I've tried covering it with a towel soaked in water. And I watched some fella on TV that at this point, when they put their dough ball in, this fella just covers it with saran wrap. And I found that works real well. It keeps your dough from drying out. All right, so there's the first step. We've put our 500 grams of flour in there, 10 grams of salt, 15 grams of yeast. And I use this, I'm not sure what you call it, just the dry yeast. A little dab of honey, it's a sweetener, and 325 grams total liquid. And I'm gonna set this aside. The first rise I've done a couple different ways. If I've got room in the refrigerator and something else to do for a while, I'll put it in the refrigerator and leave it in there 3 or 4 hours or more. And that slows down the rise, and I think it helps a lot of your flavors get set. This I'm gonna leave out at room temperature. And I don't go for a specific time, I just watch it. And when it's at least doubled, I take it to the next step. And I'm gonna clean up a little bit. And when that dough has risen to my satisfaction, we'll come back and get it ready to proof.
All right, you'll have to bear with me on this. I'm having to record a voiceover because of some audio issues we had. Right here I'm using the wooden peel that I use on my outdoor pizza oven, because when I bake in the oven in the house, I got a big pizza oven I put down before I preheat the oven. Kind of the poor man's indoor pizza oven. I like that radiant heat. Now in the past I've used fire brick, different kind of things. Works the same. What I've just put on there is some semolina flour, and I put that on the board before I put the dough down, and that keeps the dough from sticking during the proofing process. Then it slides right off into the oven. Putting a little bit of olive oil down on the counter, keep the dough from sticking. And another thing I've kind of evolved in terms of forming up the loaf for the final rise here is where I'm going for that, I guess it's called a boule, or the round loaf. Rather than roll it up, I'll show you here in a minute, I use a folding technique. And here my dough, it's slightly more than doubled in size, and that's about the size I like it to be when I get to this process. Again, olive oil in the hands, keep it from sticking. Usually the dough will pop right out of the bowl without sticking too much behind in it. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to flatten this out in a big circle, press out much of the air as I can with my hands. I've tried using rollers, but for bread, I think just pushing it out with your hands gives you a better feel for it. You don't want to roll it too thin. You're just trying to push the air out. And especially the edges, because they'll want to pull back on you. I push them down pretty good. Then at this point I fold it over in half, and what I try to do, and I'm not doing it so well in this video, is each fold I try to hold back from the bottom edge a little bit, and that helps get a little bit better loaf, fewer seams. You see here I'm tucking the corners up, then flip it over, and again do the two-hand twisty thing to form a ball. So when I feel like I've got it shaped up the way I want, and don't have any air pockets, which was a problem the first couple times I did this. I left some air pockets, so I try to be sure to press all the air out when I fold the flat part over in halves and then halves again. So now I've got this on the wooden peel that I'm going to slide it into the oven. And I found the easiest way to cover that is just use a large bowl, put it on top, keep the air out, keep it from drying too much. Okay, this is the pizza stone that I bake my bread on, and I put this in the oven before I preheat. And I'll preheat this oven to 400 degrees, and I'll do that about 15 minutes before the dough's ready to make sure it's all at an even temperature. And I'll bake at 400 degrees for 10 minutes. Then I'll drop the temperature down to 375 for about another 35 to 45 minutes, just depending. All right, let's take a look and see how this is doing. It's been about 45 minutes. 45 minutes, closer to an hour. I think I'm going to go ahead and get that ready to go in the oven. I've got my oven preheated. Let me get a little bit more olive oil. And I'm going to brush the outside of it with olive oil lightly before I put it in the oven. And I'm being careful not to get any on the board where the semolina flour is, because that makes it harder to slide off of the peel into the oven. I'm going to take me a sharp little knife here, score an X on it. I rub a little olive oil on it so it cuts nice and clean. Score a light X across there. And then I'm going to move the camera and show you how I slide that into the oven.
And a little tilt. And there we go.
So here's the final product, and you can see that this loaf split open pretty good. And I think that's because I got distracted and didn't have enough of a first rise, or maybe I should have proofed it longer. But the inside's still good. I'm still going to eat it. Thanks for watching.